Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Tech Meme Ride Home and Linode. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vitici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. Had some good time off, huh?
Yeah, it's been a fun couple of weeks, just relaxing, playing video games, reading books, which is something that I haven't done in a long time.
I know. I saw you were reading.
Yeah, working on a few shortcuts that I want to share on Mac Stories soon. It's been a good vacation. It's I don't know how I feel about the fact that making shortcuts is it's kind of a hobby at this point, but it's also work. Still, I've been playing tons of video games, so that's not work. God of War and Smash Brothers on the Switch. It's been good.
Yeah, Smash Brothers has been a big thing in our house too, because we got that for Christmas, and we spent all Christmas Day playing Super Smash Brothers till I think for like 5 or 6 hours straight. It was a lot of fun.
Very nice.
And I've been doing a bunch of the same, just taking it easy, relaxing a little bit, and thinking about 2019. So here we are in 2019, and I thought we ought to revisit a couple of articles that you and I did at the end of 2018, and those were our must-have iOS and Mac apps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's those two stories that we published right before the end of the year, right before our our holiday break, and I think it's important to go over some of our picks, not all of them. I mean, I think I have 60, and you have how many Mac apps?
I think it was about 40. So between the two of us, we have around 100.
So we're not going to talk about 100 apps today, but we wanted to highlight a few themes and a few picks. I think primarily because they will come up again through the course of 2019, and these some of these concepts, some of these features, I think we'll talk about them more in the context of iOS 13 or whatever it's going to be called at WWDC. So why don't we start? And I wanted to jump right in and talk about one of the themes in my collection of iOS apps, which is the fact that I'm now prioritizing as much as possible apps that work with files. So with the Files app and the Files framework on iOS. And I think the two most important picks in this category are IA Writer, which is my text editor that I've been using for the past 2 months, and Working Copy, which is a GitHub client that we use to manage documents in our shared GitHub repositories, but also it integrates with files. And so it makes those GitHub repos available system-wide through files. And the reason why I want to highlight these two is because of the integration that you can achieve when you combine them. So one of the two features that I want to highlight, a couple of months ago, I think it was in November, Working Copy received the ability to open external locations from third-party apps. And that feature is based on the Files picker for iOS 12, but it's actually a feature that's been available since iOS 11. It's the idea of being able to open a folder, so an entire folder, from a separate app, in this case IA Writer, and keep it as a bookmarked location inside of a different app. So in Working Copy, I can create a new destination for all the documents that I have in IA Writer. And every time I make a change in Writer, every time I edit a story or write a new section or start a new document, those changes will be ready to be committed and pushed in Working Copy. So it's the idea of it's the same folder. You don't need to duplicate documents manually anymore. You don't need to use the share sheet to say, take this draft from IA Writer and move it to Working Copy. It's the same folder, it's the same workspace, but it exists in two separate apps, and that is possible thanks to Files in iOS 12. And now IA Writer, thanks to the latest update, can also do a similar thing. It can open external locations from other apps and keep them as persistent locations in its own sidebar. So at the moment, for example, I have the scriptable and shortcuts folders from iCloud Drive in IA Writer. So in theory, I can edit JavaScript in a text editor that is primarily intended for Markdown and prose, which is mostly just to prove a point. But the idea of when apps adopt these APIs, the files framework that Apple makes available to developers, it becomes so much easier to deal with multiple apps, with collections of multiple documents, because you don't have to think about them anymore. You don't have to do what used to be the only way to work with files years ago, which was to use the share sheet and to manually copy and paste stuff and to create duplicates and to keep track of duplicates. When apps use files and the file speaker and this open in place technology, you don't have to think about that stuff anymore. So I've been working this way for the past couple of months, and I think I'll keep working this way, and I will specifically seek apps that use files, because I cannot imagine going back to a proprietary system where each app has its own library or its own integration with way of dealing with opening documents. Like, I want to have the system way. I want to have the official native files-based solution, because it's invisible, it doesn't add any complication, and most of all, it's reliable and native to the platform.
Yeah, I think it's a very important feature that's a little hard to wrap your head around in the abstract until you actually start using it. And once you do start using it, though, it's very powerful. And you don't have to, for instance, export anything out of IA Writer and put it in a separate folder that's dedicated to working copy. You don't end up with those two folders of similar or identical documents. You're just working in that one folder of documents of all the text that you've written. So it's a really nice step, and it opens up a lot of flexibility and possibility to be able to use any kind of app that manipulates text on that folder and can do the same, has the same sort of feature.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the APIs that I feel like some developers haven't adopted yet, because when it launched in iOS 11, it was not super reliable. It was buggy and it didn't really work. But Apple fixed it, I think, with one of the point releases of iOS 11. So we're talking almost 2 years ago at this point. But it's one of those things that developers look at it when it launches, it doesn't work right, and they never consider it again. And I'm trying to say that it's worth of another consideration from developers. The apps that are using it, it works really well, like Working Copy and IA Writer. I think OneWriter also, it's another text editor for iOS. And all the iCloud Drive based apps, they get this feature for free because they use iCloud Drive. So it's worth looking at again. But I also think that Apple should advocate for these features, should have better documentation, better examples on their developer mini site. And they should also keep improving this API. I want to see more improvements to files at WWDC 2019. And this is one of my app themes for the year, to keep looking for document-based apps, because I deal with a lot of documents that work with files in iOS. And I want to see, I'm on the lookout for improvements to files in the next version of iOS.
Yeah, it definitely is a feature that's been very slow to gain acceptance among developers. And I think, there are two reasons for that. One is just the historical idea that iOS apps were islands unto themselves. I mean, that's the way the first, 6-7 years, depending, it's been a slow transition over the last few years away from that to actually having a files app and access to a file system. And the other thing is, I think a lot of people sunk a lot of time and cost into creating their own file browser systems if they were document-based apps. And it's only now that you're starting to see people switch over to the system integration. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by TechMeme Ride Home, a fantastic daily podcast hosted by Brian McCullough. TechMeme Ride Home is the perfect complement to techmeme.com. The website has already earned a reputation as a place to find out what you've missed in the world of tech by collecting the very best of the tech news from around the web. TechMeme Ride Home does the same thing in podcast form, bringing together top stories, commentary, and conversations happening right now in tech. I listen to TechMeme Ride Home regularly because it's a great way to stay on top of the stories outside of the types of things that we typically cover on Mac Stories or here on App Stories. Brian McCullough does a great job of distilling the most important stories into a 15 to 20 minute show that not only hits the highlights of the tech news, but adds context, commentary, social media hot takes, and just the right amount of humor to each story. And at that length, Tech Meme Ride Home is an easy add to your podcast listening lineup. The show is released daily, Monday through Friday, around 5 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. I'm especially fond of the Friday episodes that include Brian's favorite long reads of the week on a variety of tech topics. It's a great source for reading material just in time for the weekend. In 2018, Tech Meme Ride Home helped me broaden my daily tech interests and stay on top of the latest news. I highly recommend subscribing and giving the show a try. The best way to find Tech Meme Ride Home is just to search in your favorite podcast player for Ride Home. The search term Ride Home will find Tech Meme Ride Home. It should be right at the top of the search results. I'll also put a link in the show notes. Again, go to your favorite podcast player and search for Ride Home to give Tech Meme Ride Home a try. Our thanks to Tech Meme Ride Home for supporting the show.
So the second theme that I want to highlight is I'm using more and more programming apps especially on my iPad. And I want to call out two of them, Pythonista and Scriptable. We talked about Scriptable before. It's a JavaScript interpreter for iOS that is like the Pythonista for the modern age, in the sense that instead of working with Python, it works with JavaScript, but it blends the scripting language with native OS features. So you can program your own additions to iOS and integrate with apps like Files, with iCloud Drive. Well, you can integrate with tagging, which is something that not even Shortcuts has, the ability to tag and update tags for iCloud Drive documents. You can work with notifications. You can present your own custom interfaces based on UIKit. You can work with the clipboard, with Safari. You can work with so many system frameworks, but you work this way using JavaScript, which is a very kind of accessible and very popular scripting language. And I've been having tons of fun making my own little enhancements to iOS 12, and especially making my own Siri shortcuts based on JavaScript. So the idea of, I want to do something that Siri cannot do, and there's no third-party app or no like shortcut from the Shortcuts app that can do this. Well, I can just program my own Siri shortcut. For example, I now have two scriptable-based shortcuts that I use all the time in Siri that allow me to quick look a specific photo and a specific PDF document. Like, that's something relatively easy, like relatively simple as an idea. I just want to quickly look at a photo, look at a picture that I keep. But that is not possible with shortcuts. That is not possible with Siri by default. So Scriptable lets you do that if you know how to program JavaScript, and it's 5 lines of JavaScript. So once you know how it works, it's very easy. And Pythonista, I want to mention, because this is an app that I've been using for the past 6 years. I've gone back and forth on my usage of Pythonista. Of course, I used to rely on it a lot more years ago, before workflow and before shortcuts. And I've kind of dialed back my usage of Pythonista over the past year. But for the past couple of weeks, I've been using the beta of Pythonista 3. And I have a strong feeling that this is going to be one of the best app debuts of 2019 when it launches, because the developer Olezord has completely rethought the way that Pythonista can integrate with the system. Again, sort of like Scriptable, you will be able to create Siri shortcuts based on Python scripts. You will be able to decide where to put your Python scripts, in the sense that there will be a menu to do things like, I want to have this script in the share sheet, or I want to have the script in Siri, or I want to have, and this is brand new to Pythonista 3, I want to have this script in a custom keyboard so that I can run Python code anywhere just by opening the Pythonista keyboard. And I've been playing with that Pythonista keyboard, and I already have 2 scripts that I made that I find super useful for the stuff that we do at Mac Stories and Cloud Mac Stories. And I wanna try and see how many scripts I can adapt to the keyboard, because I find the keyboard to be like a faster and easier way to manipulate text and manipulate data than opening the share sheet.
I was going to say, what's an example of a situation where the keyboard is the better way to go?
So, for example, one of my scripts is a way to open a specific section of a Mac Stories article. So our articles, when they have sections, they are formatted using the H2 HTML tag. And all those sections from H2 to H6 can be individually opened in a browser by appending the name of the section to the end of the URL of the article. But there's no, on MacStories, we have no visual menu to generate these section-specific links.
Mm-hmm.
So with Pythonista, what I can do is I can select the Safari address bar, switch to the Pythonista keyboard, tap a button, and in a couple of seconds, it'll give me all the sections that are contained in the current Safari webpage. So I can choose one from a visual list, and once I tap it, I will have the section link copied in the system clipboard, and Safari will scroll to that section also.
All right.
So instead of having to open the share sheet and like interrupt the experience, because the share sheet opens on top of Safari,
Right.
and on the iPhone it's full screen, on the iPad it's a modal pop-up. This way I can keep using the keyboard, and the current activity isn't blocked by the share sheet. And I can just do this in 2 seconds, go back to Tweetbot, for example, and paste the link, and it's done. And the other is another keyboard script that in any app, in any text editor, in any note-taking app, I can run the script and it'll paste the summary of the articles that we published on MacStories in the past week. So this is the list that we use on the MacStories weekly newsletter as a recap for the past week of coverage on MacStories. That can now be generated from the keyboard without having to open the share sheet or without having to switch to another app. So the idea of I want to be able to manipulate text without switching context and without switching apps, this will be one of the things that I will go crazy in 2019, I think. And it's a lot of fun to sort of rethink automation in the sense of what if automation was a keyboard, and what if automation happened at a keyboard level? What kind of how can you save time so that you don't have to open the share sheet, so that automation can happen almost invisibly? So that's one of the things I'm excited about to try over the next few weeks.
Yeah, that's I like that previously on MacStories one, because as the person who puts together the newsletter every Friday, usually what I would do in the past was I would go into Pythonista, run it, copy the text, open a document, paste it in, that kind of thing, and then eventually then I'd have to switch over to a Mac because I'd have to copy the HTML to put it into the MailChimp template. But it was a multi-step process for something that's a really pretty simple list.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to see what I can do with photos. I want to see what I can do with scraping web pages, because that's something that I know how to do. So that will be fun to see how it evolves in 2019 once Pythonista 3 launches. But in the meantime, I have the beta, and it's a lot of fun. So I have 2 more themes. One of them we covered before. I don't think I need to explain this. Apps that work with reminders. We did an entire episode of App Stories about reminders.
Right.
And the idea of using a task manager that is not only a task manager, but also a system framework, which means that your tasks aren't just limited to a single app, but they can be viewed in different ways, and they can be processed in different ways across multiple apps. So from my list, Good Task, which is my main task manager and also the app of the year, and Calendar 366, which is this calendar client that I discovered a few months ago. It integrates calendars and reminders, and it supports calendar sets, which is a feature that I think Fantastical first invented a few years ago on the Mac. But that feature is still not available in Fantastical for iOS. And until Fantastical for iOS does sets, Calendar 366 has them on iOS, and it's great because you can create your own sets of calendar events and reminders from specific lists. It's really awesome. And of course, shortcuts. I didn't include shortcuts in the roundup because it's my roundup doesn't include Apple-made apps. But I'm using shortcuts, of course, to search across my reminders, to present custom lists of reminders based on specific criteria, like show me reminders that contain links in the note field, or show me reminders due in the next, 5 days, which is not something that you can easily do, unless you specifically ask Siri. So, of working with reminders, I want to see Apple rethink not the framework, but the Reminders app. So it will be interesting to see by the end of 2019 if there is a major update to Reminders, like there was one for Apple Notes years ago. I want to see if I will still be using all this collection of third-party apps for reminders, or if the Reminders app alone will be able to satisfy all my needs. My idea slash fear or concern is that reminders will get a major update, but some of the new features will not be available as an API to third-party developers. So if you want to have the fancy new reminders features, you will have to use the Apple Reminders app. But that's just speculation. We'll see how it goes. And finally, John, as the owner of a new Mac Mini, you will see in the roundup a collection of apps and utilities that are designed to work with macOS. So stuff like screens or Luna Display or file browser, or again, not mentioned, but I do this all the time, the SSH action in shortcuts. I want to be able, I'm using the Mac Mini as a home server, and of course I need to be able to run commands on the Mac Mini easily. I want to be able to log into the Mac Mini both visually via VNC and just remotely with the file browser, with the file manager. So file browser allows me to save files, download files from my Mac Mini, but also I'm using the iPad Pro as a secondary display for my Mac Mini, and that's where the Luna Display comes into play. They've been a sponsor before of both App Stories and Mac Stories, but here, this is my personal opinion as a customer of Luna Display because I bought a USB-C adapter myself. And right now, at this very moment, I'm looking at your profile picture, John, on Skype, running on the iPad Pro, which is being used as a secondary display for my Mac Mini. So the idea of I want to find ways to let iOS and macOS coexist. And so this is a topic that we'll explore on Mac Stories over the next few months. The idea of blending automation from shortcuts with automation on macOS. So the two worlds of shortcuts and the terminal, or shortcuts and Siri on iOS and stuff like Keyboard Maestro and Automator on macOS working together. This is something that I've been playing around for since November, essentially. And I will have, at some point, I don't know when, but I will have an article about the things that I'm doing. And I plan on keep doing this stuff for 2019. So it'll be a regular thing.
Yeah, I think the timing of that is good too, because we're all waiting to see what Marzipan's going to be. But in the meantime, there are things you can do to bring the two OSs together using automation, and that's I'm looking forward to seeing that. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you'll have access to a suite of powerful hosting options with prices starting at just $5 per month. And you'll be up and running with your own virtual server in the Linode cloud in under a minute. You know what's special about Linode? You can always find the help when you need it. You can email them or call them or even chat over IRC in the Linode community. That's because Linode knows how important it is to get the help you want when you need it. They also have a suite of amazing guides and support documentation to give you a reference when you need it. Linode's intuitive control panel will allow you to deploy, boot, resize, snapshot, and clone your virtual servers in just a few clicks. On top of that, Linode features two-factor authentication to keep you safe. We use Linode at Mac Stories for things like some of our Slack bots. Okay, let's talk about pricing because Linode has fantastic pricing options. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for only $5 per month. And they offer high memory plans starting at 16 gigabytes of RAM. Linode has a special deal just for listeners of this show, too. If you sign up at linode.com/appstories, that's linode.com/appstories, you'll not only be supporting us, but you'll also get $20 towards a Linode plan. On a 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's like 4 months free. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's nothing to lose. So go to linode.com/appstories to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of that special $20 offer. Or just use the promo code AppStories2018 at checkout. Thanks so much to Linode for supporting the show. Okay, Federico, let's talk a little bit about Mac apps.
Yes.
I think this is a good place to jump off since you just covered your Mac Mini. And in my roundup this year, it was interesting because my Mac usage didn't change in terms of the apps I use a whole lot in 2018. And I think part of that is, the Mac app ecosystem just doesn't move nearly as quickly as iOS does. And trend that I've seen, it's not at a crisis level or anything, but a trend that I've noticed is that a lot of the important services that we use no longer really bother to build an actual native Mac app. I mean, this is the whole Electron story that we've talked about in the past. Things like Slack or Trello or GitHub Desktop, all those apps they're not great Mac apps, but they're still must-haves for me because they're necessary to use the services that we use to get our work done. So that has been a little bit concerning. And the other aspect is there are other apps that I use that are native Mac apps, but just haven't seen a lot of love in the last year or two. I mean, I'm thinking about apps like Do, which is a reminders alarm clock type of app that is it sees a lot more attention on iOS than it does on the Mac. On the Mac, the backgrounds still have pinstripes, for instance. I mean, it works and it syncs well, and I don't have complaints about it in terms of its functionality. I still use it, but it's just kind of fallen a little bit behind. It seems a little neglected, as does an app like Reader, which is the RSS client I'm using on the Mac. Again, I like Reader. The reason I use it is because it's the best of the lot. But there aren't that many choices for RSS clients on the Mac as compared to what you have on iOS. But putting all of that aside for a second, it really points to the apps that are my absolute favorites on the Mac. And those are the ones that really do integrate well across both platforms, both iOS and the Mac, because I use both, and I use both regularly. And for me, it's one of the most important things is having an app like Ulysses or Things or MindNote, all of which are very, they're not identical across platforms, but boy, they're really super close. And there's a familiarity and a seamlessness of working from one to the other. I can, be working at my desk, pick up my iPad, go outside, open up Ulysses, and boom, pick up right where I left off. It's a great experience. There aren't very many features that you don't have in that app or something like Things. And so, Things I would say is one of my absolute favorites from 2018 because it's got an extraordinary amount of flexibility. The fact that it has the ability to do searches just by starting to type, which I know, that came to iOS a little later. That is a fantastic thing. I love the design. I love the headers that you can put in your projects so that they don't really serve any purpose other than visually breaking up the tasks. So you can have, maybe there's a Mac Stories project and here are the things you have to edit and here are the things you have to write. And here, it just gives you an extra layer of organization that doesn't add much complexity, which I really appreciate. On the writing side, Ulysses has continued to be my main text editor, although I have been using IA Writer a lot more too myself because I've always used IA Writer as kind of the editing tool. When once I had pushed something to a repo and someone else had edited it, instead of trying to, and this goes a little bit to what you were saying, instead of trying to shoehorn that back into Ulysses, which doesn't have the kind of files app integration that IA Writer has, instead of trying to do that and reverse engineer that, I would just open the document once it was in the repo in IA Writer. And that has a couple of benefits. One, it was just easier. And the other one is that sometimes that change of context, just having a different app that you're working in, helps you find those typos and look at an article a little differently and edit it. So that's what I've been doing with IA Writer so far.
Yeah. I wanted to mention IA Writer. One of the features that I forgot to talk about is the fact that you can create your own custom template for previewing documents in HTML. And the developers at IA have published on GitHub, there's a repo with details about how you can assemble your own templates using a collection of HTML and CSS and even JavaScript files. And so thanks to our own Brett Terpstra, I asked Brett, can you make a custom template for IA Writer that actually looks like Mac Stories so that we could preview article drafts as if they were real articles on the website? And it got to work. And of course, Brett is a genius. So we have now, and I shared this with you, John, a template that once you preview a document in IA Writer, it loads what looks like Mac Stories. And you can even switch between the dark and light themes of Mac Stories from inside the preview window of IA Writer. And this works on the Mac, works on the iPhone, works on the iPad. It's amazing. Like, if I finally have a way to see what a story will look like on the website with support for most of our custom syntax. So stuff like YouTube embeds and table of contents, aside boxes, pull quotes, image captions, all the things that we have on the website. We have this custom template that we can now use in IA Writer, and it's amazing.
Yeah, a lot of apps have HTML previewers, but it really makes a big difference being able to look at it exactly the way it's going to show up on the site. And I've really loved that too. And on the Mac, you can do it side by side, so you actually can be editing on one side and looking at what it's going to look like on the other side, which is just been really nice.
That's going to be nice once. That's going to be nice in iOS 13 once there's an API to do that. Hopefully.
I sure hope so. I hope so. Fingers crossed. I guess I'll mention just a couple of more apps. One is Yoink, and I've talked about Yoink a lot in the past, but what really made the Mac app even more valuable this year than in the past was the revamp of the iOS app. And that to me just shows what is possible when there's tighter integration between Mac apps and iOS apps, because what you can do now is you can hand off snippets, whether it's a file or a snippet of text or an image, whatever it is that you're putting on the temporary Yoink shelf, you can pass it back and forth between iOS and the Mac super easily with handoff. And I use that all the time to just move something from one spot to the other. Because, for instance, maybe I'm writing at my Mac and I'm writing about an iOS app and I'm taking screenshots on my phone or my iPad, but I want to drop it into the article that I'm writing on the Mac. I just use Yoink and send it off to the Mac. It's works in a way like a temporary clipboard that way too, more than just a parking spot for snippets. The other app, which I'm probably the most new to, is Lightroom from Adobe. I've been doing more photography lately, and I really like Lightroom. I've found it both on iOS and the Mac to be pretty great, and especially on the Mac, I like that I can, I've got a 27-inch 4K monitor, and I can display my photos on there and really dive into the detail if I have to. And Lightroom just does a great job of kind of staying out of the way, focusing on the images, but making the tools kind of intuitive and readily available so you can edit the photographs. So that's one I've been enjoying a lot. In terms of 2019, I'm really excited about Marzipan.
Yes.
I was just reading the other day the developer's blog, the developer of Fiery Feeds blog, about how he's thinking about doing a Marzipan app. And Fiery Feeds is really one of the best iOS RSS readers out there, and it's one that's not on the Mac now, and I would love to see it come over to the Mac. And I think RSS readers are like a perfect category for something like Marzipan, where you're going to have a 2 or 3 pane iPad style app that would translate really well, I think, onto the Mac.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I disagree with some of the people in the Apple community. The idea that Marzipan is going to be a tragedy for Mac app development. But I can tell you that as someone who works primarily on iOS, as the iPad is his primary computer, those few times a week that I want to use my Mac or that I need to use my Mac, I'm annoyed by the lack of the same apps that I enjoy on my iPhone and iPad. And so if I will be able to use the Mac with the same apps that I have on my iPad, with the same features and a consistent design, but some different interactions, because of course it's a desktop computer, I will be super happy to have that kind of experience. And if it ends up that this whole Marzipan deal is just iOS 13, we'll have the Mac as a new target for iOS apps. I will be fine with that. And honestly, I will be super happy to see that kind of, revitalizing the Mac app landscape. Because I want to have all of these great apps that I have on my iPad. They would make for more than decent. They would make for good Mac apps if developers, that is, will be given the tools to make their interfaces flexible so that they can scale from touch to cursor, from 12.9-inch display to a 27-inch display. So I'm all in favor of letting iOS developers write software for the Mac. I want to see it done right, but I'm not against it on principle, because I agree with you, John. You said this many times and you wrote about this on Mac Stories and the Club. Having iOS apps run on the Mac still better than those Electron apps that are not native to the platform at all and that consume resources and don't work well. Because I believe that if the Mac were to gain a different kind of app, having UIKit will still be better than having Electron. With the big difference being that I think Apple will actually care about making the UIKit version of those apps optimized for the Mac. So what we see today with those first 4 apps for macOS Mojave, I don't think it's representative of the final version of what this product will look like. And I think Apple knows that they need to make it possible for developers to have their UIs actually adapt to the cursor, to the long-time traditions of Mac UI design. So judging Marzipan for what it is today, I think it's a bit short-sighted. And so I'm super excited to see what's going to look like by the end. I don't care about the name. I think it'll just be called iOS 13, and the Mac will just be another target, and the Mac App Store will just have iOS apps. So this is one of the things that I'm super, super intrigued to see how it shakes out in 2019.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting year. There's no doubt about it. Well, all right, Federico, I think that's probably a good place to stop. That's a good way to kind of put a capstone on 2018 and move on into 2019 and all the excitement as we lead up to WWDC in about 6 months. I want to thank our sponsors again, TechMeme Ride Home and Linode, for sponsoring this show. And you can find Federico and me over at macstories.net, writing every day of the week. And on Twitter, of course, where Federico is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VWRHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.